Angela Roseborough from the Roseborough Group. She's also a member of Crescent's board. She has flown here from Las Vegas. Thank you for doing that. And all yours.
Thank you. Well, thank everybody for coming. This is such a dynamic panel. I am looking forward to facilitating what I hope to be a really informative discussion. I'm going to start the flow, and I'm going to let the experts take it away. But let me start by introducing the panel. First, I want to introduce Sarah Rosen-Fortel. She's a public policy executive and housing expert who serves as the president of the Urban Institute, a nonpartisan social and economic policy research institute. She was also the founding operating officer and then executive vice president of the Center of American Progress, and has also served as deputy assistant to the president for economic policy and deputy director of the White House National Economic Council. Please join me in welcome. Next, I have Clarence Anthony, is the CEO and Executive Director of the National League of Cities, the largest and oldest organization representing America's cities, towns, villages, and their leaders. He was also the former mayor of South Bay, Florida. He started when he was 12. Please join me in welcoming Clarence. Vice President and Chief Economist at the Bay Policy Institute and the Adjunct Professor at Georgetown University. Previously, he served as an Executive Managing Director, Chief Economist, and Head Research at the Clearinghouse Association and Chief Economist of the Clearinghouse Payments Company. Please join me in welcoming Bill. He is the CEO of Dinniger Strategic Partners and former president of the Greater Washington Board of Trade, where he oversaw the leading regional organizations representing the business interests of major companies throughout Northern Virginia and the District of Columbia and suburban Maryland.
Thank you.
As you can see, I think we can solve the world's problems with the people that are on this panel, so we're going to try to do that today. I want to start the conversation with giving your perspective on downtown and the current impact of real estate on the overall economy. So, Sarah, let's start with you.
Nice small question to start. And I think we're going to be talking about that question for the next hour. So let me just provide a couple of initial thoughts. First of all, if anyone tells you that they know what the future of the downtowns are going to be, you should probably discount whatever opinion they have, because none of us know. We know some forces that are going to shape that. But I think the most important to think about is that whatever it is, it's going to be different. We're not going back. It's not going to look like it looked before. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be bad. A couple of key things to think about. Because I grew up in New York City in the 1960s when the neighborhood I lived in was considered derelict. It was one of the first urban renewal areas. Today, it's a thriving, in fact, unaffordably thriving neighborhood on the Upper West Side. And then I watched the decline of the central cities and the flight to the suburbs and the suburbanization and malls of the city and the death of the urban area. And then look at the last 15 years where our central cities became enormously vibrant, dynamic places. And in fact, we've seen some of the opposite, which is now low and moderate income people who in many cases work in large parts of the city are pushed out and away from those central city areas. So we've seen huge reversals of trend, and those trends are going to change again, but it's not necessarily going to be either of the models we had before. We know that people want to be near amenities, but they maybe don't need to be near those amenities for their lunch break. They maybe want to be near their amenities at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. If you drive out MacArthur Boulevard like I do at 6 o'clock on a Friday, all the traffic is coming this way, not going out with me when I leave my office. And we've done research even during the pandemic about what people valued about the communities they lived in. They valued the parks. They valued the arts institutions. They valued the restaurants. They valued access to other people and social activity and entertainment. I hope and pray that I will bring my workforce back into the office more than we are today. I think it's very harmful to the culture of my institution. But I know we will never work the way we worked before. So I don't know what that's going to all mean. We should talk about housing costs, we should talk about perceptions of cities through this panel. But the future is going to be a model we can't yet imagine.
Well, I'll just say amen to your prayer. Because, first of all, let me just say that the challenges that we're having in the Washington, D.C. region around, coming back to work in downtown, I hope that you will leave this room saying it's not just the mayor's and the city council's responsibility, but it's all of our responsibility to help create or recreate the vibrant downtown that we once had. I do think it's coming back. But there has been what I call the great reshuffle, if you will. I'm from Florida originally, West Palm Beach. And during the pandemic, what we saw was a loss of population in the Northeast. Florida is taking in my country of Florida now, and call it the state of Florida, but that's a political statement. I'll talk to y'all about that later. It's taking in 1,200 residents from the Northeast a week. And then you also add in Arizona, you add in Texas. We're also seeing California since 2020 lost 600,000 people to Arizona and Nevada and places like that. And so I'm framing all of that so that we could, in our region, know that the suburbs of the DMV lost about 1%, declined about 1%, but the District of Columbia itself is pretty stable as a community in terms of the population. Commercial-wise, I think we have a lot of work to do because we are definitely seeing the restaurants closing, even though the small ones, every week there's a new restaurant somewhere that I'm trying to try around town. But I will tell you, riding around 5, 6 o'clock, you are not seeing the vibrant communities. So I think my challenge to us in this room is to recognize that reshuffle of population that is occurring right now is having an impact on our region. It's more, again, in the commercial space because we are shortage of housing right now. We need to get a greater supply.
I'll pass. I don't know anything about urban trends, so I'll let the experts speak to it.
I'm a business guy, so hope and prayers, I didn't incorporate that into my operating plan. I will say that things are bad into the foreseeable future. It will not get better. And if you're looking to buy or rent, it's an incredible time. The bottom of the market, if that's what you're waiting for, this is sort of what it looks like. We're going to bump along this for a while. Not a hockey stick recovery, more of a frying pan. I love this city, I love the region. I'm an optimist, and I've never been this uncertain. So when asked to participate in the 2024 outlook, I was like, I can get you to October 5th. And of course, last night happened on Capitol Hill, and I was like, I can get you to 5 p.m. That's about where it is right now. If you think it's going to get better after the government shutdown on November 17th, right before Thanksgiving, if you think that the Republicans are going to figure out their speaker and get all those appropriations bills wrapped up before the end of the year, hope and prayers works for that. But for the rest of us, I think that there are some opportunities out there. And if you are a COO or a CFO, you represent associations, you're bringing people back to work, but not that many, yeah, you've got to make your own decisions that are right for your organization. And I will say that it's an uncertain time, but there are real opportunities out there.
Thank you. I want to start with something that, Clarence, you brought up, and this is migration out of, the DMV. So Joe will stay with you for a minute. So we've seen reports of the out-migration from DC, but what are the migration patterns for the greater DMV area, including people coming in and coming prospects?
Well, I think that this is a place that attracts sort of the joke that every junior class president finds his or her way to Washington, D.C. We are always front page of the news around the world. And big decisions, important things that happen here change lives, they influence the world. If you want to do something that matters, this is a great place to do it. There are other places, but this is a place that's kind of in the DNA. And so people study to come here. They flock to come here. I'm thrilled that we're growing universities in this region, right? USC bought the National Association of Broadcasters buildings up by Newport. You've got Hopkins that bought the museum. I'm sad to see the museum go, but you know, it was the museum. And then you've got Syracuse University and a number of others. So we have some cottage industries that are growing and it's attractive. And then surrounding, right, Amazon and Boeing, and you've got the growth of Hilton, and you've got some companies in quantum. There are some really big opportunities on big things. But people are leaving here for a variety of reasons. They're leaving here because it's very expensive to live here. So if they can't afford to stay here, or they've got better opportunities, sort of 95 on the way south is just, you know, the signs that used to be if you lived here, you'd be home by now. North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, you're seeing them, and the license plates are Maryland, D.C., and a little bit of Virginia. So I do think that there's outward migration that is an economic opportunity. There are businesses, there are a lot of people in commercial and residential real estate because it's easier to do business. And I'm talking about building permitting, and I'm talking about environmental rights and the rest. It is easier to do business in those 4 states than it is in the Greater Washington region.
Sarah, I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to come to you for a minute because we talked about this kind of high cost of living and it's expensive to live here. So the DMV and other major cities have been deemed for the high cost of living, which is a huge part of that's housing, I can imagine. So what does your team predict for housing prices in the foreseeable future?
Well, we haven't precisely modeled the DMV recently. Right before the pandemic, what we did is we looked at the 8 surrounding jurisdictions and looked at what a natural growth in housing would have looked like to meet population and what we'd actually produce. If you go back to 2008, in housing, we had a period of time due to the Great Recession when essentially housing production stopped. So you had population growth, but you had no new units. And then we started housing production again, but it wasn't at the rate even of, let alone catching back up, but it wasn't even at the rate that we were continuing to grow the population. And then we had the pandemic with a brief pause. And then we had this huge rise in housing market, and capital is now flowing to production. But we're seeing huge barriers to meeting that production. So what we did for the DMV, and it was a study that was ultimately embraced by the COG, and most of the jurisdictions, except for our friends in Montgomery County, essentially embraced the targets for growth. And what it said was we're going to have to produce this much housing that's affordable in this area, this much housing that's transit-oriented, et cetera. We are seeing a huge increase in production, but I don't feel confident that we're going to get there because more of the production is at the high end, and housing is not, the economists of the world will tell us that markets will respond, but we have other factors that essentially create externalities that prevent us from building the affordable. 2 basic things. One is at the bottom of the market, people's incomes don't support the cost of a unit, which means you have a gap. Those folks end up paying 50-60% of their income in housing. It also occupies units that would otherwise naturally be affordable to the next group, and et cetera. So we're producing a lot of McMansions, but we aren't producing enough of the kind of housing. And then we have zoning. That makes it very difficult to densify where we need to densify, and if we don't densify, the more affordable housing is going to be at the outer reaches. Think about the city I was describing before. The city I was describing before is an amenity-rich place. Who works to deliver and provide those amenities? Our workforce are having to live further and further away, and this goes back to the demand for commercial real estate. My early career staff say my commute is an hour and 10 minutes. You're, Sarah, you can afford to be in the office in 25 minutes because you can live in Bethesda, but I can't afford to live in Bethesda. And so I want to be zooming from my second bedroom 40 minutes away from downtown. So if we can make the city more affordable, it will also help us to attract workers. So bottom line is we are producing more units than we've produced in a very long time, but not nearly yet enough, and not especially enough in the places where we need it most for the incomes that we need it most.
You know, I want to say on that because I think that's part of that migration when people are moving, and they're moving to the Sun Belt. And although we know that DMV and other northern cities have many unique attributes, to what Jim was saying and what Sarah was saying, Clarence, do you think this will be a destination for workers and businesses like it was in the 2000s and in 2010?
I think I am more optimistic, and I believe in hope and prayer, but that's not a plan. So I agree with you on that. I think I'm more optimistic if we look at the migration from, as Jim said, this region. You still are going to have people coming here because of the opportunity, the amenities that they believe in this city or they believe in this region as a place of opportunity, especially diverse populations of people. Even though we're seeing people of color move to the suburbs more than they have in the past, you still have that population that comes to DC who wants to make a difference. Now, I also look at the cost of housing that exists here. It is exceptionally high for most young people who want to start their career in the District of Columbia. And we've seen, as Sarah has indicated, that we have to deal with the issue of density, not just in Washington, D.C., but all over America. Most communities say, I don't want to be like Chicago. I don't want to be like this city, Miami or other places like that. But in order to address the needs of our future residents, we're going to have to do that. So let's be candid about another thing. The issue of crime is a big deal. Again, I moved here from West Palm Beach, and when I turned on NPR driving to the office and heard that we had our, I think it's 200 murder by gunfire, it shocked me, it shook me as an individual. I believe, though, again, this is going to have to be all of our issue to assist with if we're going to really see our region return. We have right now a lot of money coming into cities, towns, and villages all over America. The infrastructure bill, the ARPA dollars. What we have is a mixed match. So I'm going back to when I was told I didn't know how to dress when I was a kid. That don't match, that's mixed. So we got all of this money, but we don't have the skills. And we got to figure out how we get that balanced right now if we are going to be an economy and a region that is going to prosper. Because if you got all of these jobs, but you have nobody trained to take advantage of those jobs, we're going to continue to have this community that don't feel as if they belong. Because you can live someplace, but if you don't see yourself prospering in that place, then you're not going to be able to stay there and be a valuable part of the community. So I agree with you in some sense. I'm very optimistic, as you can tell, but we got a lot of work to do, or we're going to continue to see crime. We're going to continue to see the lack of opportunity to have real housing opportunities for residents that live here. Because if I didn't have the job that I had 10 years ago, ain't no way in the hell I'd have been able to afford the house I got. Now it's the greatest thing I've ever invested in, because now I can retire, y'all. I can walk off the stage right now because of the damn house I bought 10 years ago. But I don't know many in my office, whether they're black, white, whatever, diversity, and my young folks that work with me every day, my team, they're struggling. And we got to do something about that.
May I suggest that you would have grown animals when you were a kid?
I did.
Jim, you also had a perspective about how crime is going to impact kind of real estate.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I see it as a migration issue where people are leaving the region, but it is keeping people from coming to the region. You know, you're going to send your kids to school in the District of Columbia, and you're going to think twice. You're going to rent space downtown, you're going to think twice. That there's a shooting not far from the waterfront at Point the other night. It's visceral, and I would say that it is a lack of hope. It's not just the economy for the people that are committing crime. It's not just the poverty. It's not just the education issues. Like, hope has just sort of been sucked out of the air for so many people in this region that they don't see an opportunity. They don't see how they get out. And so, you know, go carjack. What's the risk? Like what's the risk? And that's debilitating. There's not a one sort of size-fits-all solution. I mean, Clarence was a mayor. He knows it's everything needs to work together. So you can talk about policing, you can talk about incarceration, you can talk about surveillance cameras, you know, speed cameras. We're going to triple the number of speed cameras in the District of Columbia, which has nothing to do with lowering the speed limit or lowering the speed. It has everything to do with making up for the taxpayers that they're going to lose on commercial real estate. Like, that's not a solution. So I would say that crime has a debilitating effect, and I'm not comparing it to it, but commuting times has a debilitating effect. There are real pause. There are real things that freeze the recovery if we are to get to a recovery. Crime, commuting is certainly one of them. The high cost of living, housing, the lack of amenities, the pandism. Has nothing to do with crime. Pandism. But that's an attraction. Like 2 million plus people go to the zoo every year. It's an attraction. Our Nationals are last place. We haven't been in the playoffs since 2019. Like, we need our swagger back. And if you lose your swagger, and we are, and clearly we are, it's very hard to recover that. And without it, you know, you don't get to recruit and attract. So I know I'm making it sound like we're circling the drain. We are circling the drain.
It's always so upbeat and cheerful to be with you.
I do want, you know, sometimes, you know, you're living your own life, and, you know, your old song that says, or story that says, you know, my feet are hurting, but you see someone else that don't have feet, right? If you go to San Francisco right now, you'd be shouting and saying, we are in a great region. If you go to LA in certain parts, you'd be saying DC is a pretty good city. I travel around the country every week. Seattle, you're talking about circling the drain. You're not even close to that in terms of what I'm seeing around America when I travel. Now, there are cities that are putting together what we call comeback plans, come back downtown and others. But they're, right now, San Francisco, their tax base, and the companies that are moving from downtown, closing coffee shops, if you went there right now, you would get your ticket back to DC.
Blame it on the pandemic all you want, and now I get a place out in West Virginia, and maybe I'm going to live and work from there. But you're not coming back, and that's a big part of the issue. It is, you know, it's not just crime. I said it's the high cost of living, it's the quality of life, it's the access to amenities, it's the incredible dollars on housing. And I said, it's not good, it's not going to get better in the foreseeable future. And now if you're looking to buy or rent on office time and office space, it's a great time. But I'm not optimistic about the real world problems in this region. And I do not compare myself to other places or the region to other places that are not as bad. Like, not as bad isn't what I'm aiming for. I'm aiming to be a great city again. I'm aiming to be a wonderful destination. I'm aiming to be the best. I'm a competitor. We're all competitors. It's a type A personality that we all have. We choose to live here. And so I hear you about Seattle, San Francisco, and other places. But we're Washington, and I think we need our swagger back, and I think we need to aim higher. And settling for anything less is the road to defeat.
And I want to say, I am a city guy. Every day, get up, advocating for cities. You're right. And I think your question, Angela, is about the responsibility that all of us have for that. And as a company, what's your space? What's your role? And I think that that's the piece that has been interesting to think about. I also can tell you, I agree with Jim about this. It's not secret because it's reported every night about the impact of fentanyl. Our region is sleeping on the data associated with that. Back in the day when I was young, we had crack and we criminalized that, and we put a lot of people in prison over usage of crack. Then we got, the opioid, where we humanized it because it was a suburban issue. Now the fentanyl issue is here. It started in a suburban, but it is our kids in high school with gummies and things like that. We do have an issue. We have challenges. And I do hope that we will face those challenges as a corporation, as a community, because otherwise we are going to not just lose our swagger, we'll lose our real faith in our community, which I don't want to see happen.
Thank you. It is apparent your love of this, all of your love of this community and the DMV of the move us on. I want to now kind of shift to like the post-pandemic impact on real estate. And so, Sarah, I'm going to start with you. As COVID-19 pandemic prompted shifts in urban living preferences and work patterns, how do you envision the long-term evolution of Washington, D.C.'s region, urban and suburban areas? Are there any trends you're seeing or strategies?
Well, I think we started to touch on this before. I think I'm thrilled when I see density going up on Upper Wisconsin Avenue. We've got to be able to put many more housing units in the places that access transportation. We've got to be investing in the regional transportation infrastructure so that people can get to work. I don't understand why half as many people come to work, but it still takes me as long on a Wednesday to get to and from home. But it doesn't on Monday and Friday, let me tell you that. So we should all have our in-office days on Monday and Friday. We've got to figure out how to crack the regional transportation costs. And if we can do that, then I think, will make it easier for folks. We also, to be willing to come to work, which will be a really important thing for the commercial real estate sector. We also are seeing a conversation about conversion of older commercial office buildings to housing. There's a lot of studies you can find. It works for a very small number of properties, which is not to say that those small number of properties converting wouldn't be a big help to the number of units that we need to solve. But the floor plates, the expense of doing that is hard in a lot of places. So that's not the panacea problem. We need to be looking at vacant lands. We need to be looking at different ways of using our existing property. We need to be doing zoning density changes. That also means our suburbs have to get over the NIMBYism. Because the close-in suburbs are still where we can produce units that people, even if they're only coming in a couple days a week, should be able to afford to live. And these 3/4 of an acre size properties just don't make sense when you're that close in and when you're near transit. So I think the future here, we kind of know what to do, but it is not federal policy. It's much harder to do than even the CHIPS Act or the infrastructure bill or the climate at the national level. This is local leaders coming together and developing a plan that's going to that is a combination of subsidy for the bottom of the market and density and zoning reforms, and kind of clearing the path for quicker, faster production of housing and reuse. We have a lot of naturally occurring affordable that's being occupied by middle-class families because there isn't enough they can afford. If we were to make that, if we were to have more production at the middle level, we would also free some of that up to the bottom of the market. So we've got a lot of work to do, and it's a multi-pronged strategy. I'm also, the other thing we should get going here on is the interest rate environment is a huge piece of housing affordability right now. And if the rest of the economy, and this is national policy, if we could get interest rates down, it would also make a lot of these deals pencil out by NACO.
Great setup. Bill has his own card.
Bill is representing.
Yeah, like, a question that impacts all of this. What are the interest rates going to be doing in the next 6 to 12 months? And another biggie, when is the recession coming?
So, and I should say for the crowd that I'm answering more from my experience of 24 years at the Fed, where I was in monetary affairs, went to a decade of FOMC meetings, and more importantly and interestingly, a decade of the meetings in the special library before the FOMC meetings, where the agenda was settled on by Troika, the chairman, the president of the New York Fed, and vice chairman. Yeah, really incredibly interesting thing to experience. But to answer your question, so let me just take a step back, right? So 10 blocks north of here, twice a quarter, the Federal Market Committee meets. That's the rate setting arm of the Fed. They meet basically to settle on a target for what's the federal funds rate. Federal funds rate is a market rate, it's not an official rate. It's the rate that banks lend to each other on an unsecured basis. And they hit that target by changing the size of their balance sheet and by setting the rates at which they lend to banks and at which they take deposits from banks. And they're very effective. And what do they aim to achieve? They aim to achieve two things: inflation of 2% and full employment. And sometimes those two things work together, sometimes they work apart. And as I'm sure we all know, over the last year and a half, the FOMC has raised that federal funds rate target more rapidly than happened since Goldman, basically because inflation got out of control. Happy to talk about how that happened too, but I'll stop there. Probably more relevant to all of you though is what longer term rates. The 10-year rate when I looked this morning is at 4.81%. That also is higher than it's been for decades. And so, think about what are the determinants of that rate. Well, there's sort of three things that people talk about a lot. One is the FOMC going to raise the rate again? Are they going to raise the rate in November or December? That's probably the least relevant, actually, for what the 10-year rate is going to be. But I'll go into some of the considerations. The second thing is, how long are rates going to remain elevated? Are they elevated? Not elevated by historical norms, but they're certainly elevated by the last couple decades. How long will they have to stay there? That's more important. And then also, what are the determinants of the longer term trend in rates, the longer term level of rates? So to go through those things, so what's going to happen, so the markets right now, and personally, I say I'm a finance professor too, I don't believe that, anybody's going to tell you what things are, going to do that's not already embedded in the market. So the best you're going to do is take advantage of the knowledge of the 100,000 people with trillions of dollars on the lines whose expertise is reflected in market prices. And what do those prices tell you? Well, they're currently putting about a 75% chance that the FOMC will not raise the funds rate in November, and about a 50% chance that they will not raise the funds rate neither in November or December. And what's going to determine that? Well, Jay Powell made it clear that another raise is certainly on the table, and the projections provided by the committee, the median, most of them, more than half of them, wrote down that there would be another increase this year. But it's going to depend really crucially on what the data are going to be showing over the next few weeks, whether they're going to show the economy is doing pretty well. There's considerable momentum, remaining momentum in the economy. There's risks to the outlook we have to talk about. And inflation is coming down. It's still well above the 2% target. But I think that, for the near term, the committee is going to be paying attention to just how much momentum does the economy seem to have. There's some signs of slowing. There's a lot of tightening in the pipeline that could be slowing things down. And the data that's going to come out Friday on employment, that's going to be a very important reading for what's going to happen first. If things come in showing more momentum, they'll raise one more quarter, I think, and then they'll signal that they're going to be holding it for a while. If they don't, then they might wait, but they'll still probably signal that there's a possibility of another quarter. So for the outlook for rates, it's just not really that critical. More important is, how long do they think they're going to have to stay there? The committee has made it clear they've basically been on a mission to push back against the market's expectation that rates are going to go right back down. And part of that is just the fact that market quotes reflect the average of one of the possible things that can happen. And so a lot of ways that rates could stay where they are. There are certainly ways that they could go higher, but then of course, as we all know, there's also another recession could be a possibility, rates could go down. When you average across those, the market prices show a decline, whereas the FOMC tends to communicate about the baseline path, the most likely path, and think about that path. And they're saying, look, we're not going to be cutting. You need to, expect that we're going to be staying there for a while. That really is going to depend upon whether or not inflation appears to be getting embedded into wages. If that happens, they are going to definitely hold tight for a while. They may even raise rates further, but also just the momentum in the economy. Economy continues to grow at a solid pace. They're going to keep rates about where they are for another year and a half, probably. One thing I should have mentioned about what's going to happen in November, because so if you look, the FOMC will never deliver a tightening surprise. When they talk about what they've done and how they've done it, you look at the transcripts of the meetings or recall the conversations in the meetings, what you'll see is that they evaluate the success of an easing by how much they've surprised the markets. They want to see a reaction. And they'll say, well, we can't just do that because that's what people expect. We have to do more. For tightening, it's the exact opposite. Basically, they say, people aren't expecting us to tighten. We have to prepare the markets. We don't want to surprise the markets. And so if the probability of a tightening remains where it is in November at 25%, then they're not going to tighten. So if it's there and they decide they're going to tighten, you got to look for communications, either testimonies, speeches, more importantly, backdoor communications from the chairman, probably to Nick Timiraos of the Wall Street Journal, read mixed stuff. They will prepare the market for a tightening if that's what's going to happen. So okay. So now, turning to so I discussed the middle, let me go to the longer term. So what determines the 10-year rate? Well, basically, it's the average of where rates, well, there's a few things. So part of it is, it's sort of the average outlook of where these overnight rates are going to be over the next 10 years. And that's importantly influenced by what's going to happen over the next few years, of course, because it's high. But it's also influenced by where things are going, where people think things are going. And that number has been moving up. And it's been moving up for a few reasons. One, and so when you think about where will that longer term short rate be, there's two things to think about. One is where will inflation be, and the other is where will the neutral rate of interest be, the neutral real rate of interest. The neutral real rate of interest is the rate minus inflation, so it's a real rate, and it's the rate above which you're tightening, below which you're easing. And so that's a rate that kind of determines where's the settling point. And if you look historically, that rate's been like 2%. It then dropped in the global financial crisis, and it's been close to 0 or 0.5%. But signs are that it's moving up. Recently, there are indications that it could be moving up to 1% or more. Add inflation to that, you get 2.5%, 3% maybe. Maybe it goes back to where it was. That's where you might think that short-term rates are going to be. The other component is what people call term premium. It's the reward. It's the reward that people require to invest in longer-term rates. It's a risk premium. Just like if you buy a corporate bond, you expect some return for the risk. And so if you buy a long-term treasury, you would expect some maybe extra rate, might go the other direction, that's another conversation, might be negative, but it's been, historically, that also has been about 2%. But for the last many years, it's been close to 0. If that goes back up to 2%, suddenly you're looking at 5%, easily, as where the longer-term 10-year treasury rate's going to be. So, I don't know, that's a lot of information right there, but, happy to take any questions.
So, the magic question is a recession coming?
Is a recession coming? Right, okay. So, the likelihood of a recession has receded recently because the economy has come in stronger and the inflation has come down. So since the economy is maintaining some momentum, that means that there's a greater likelihood that it will continue to grow. The perfect outcome from the FOMC's perspective, and what they're going to engineer one way or the other, is that the economy grows below trend, so that the labor market softens up a little bit, and inflation comes down, but they don't have a recession. But there's a couple ways that you could get to a recession. One is, there's been this massive tightening of monetary policy, and monetary policy influences the economy with a lag. And also, as you all know, I'm sure, that longer-term rates and other financial conditions have tightened a lot recently. All of those things could lead the economy to slow more than necessary, even more, and tip us into a recession. The other possibility, however, another possibility is that inflation remains elevated, it remains above 2%. It's even higher, or it's showing signs of getting embedded into wages. The FOMC may need to raise rates to slow the economy enough to cause recession. The last possibility, relevant to this discussion, is that there could be a credit crunch. So, I know you're going to ask me about credit conditions, so maybe I'll stop there and answer about credit conditions if that's something you're talking about.
Yeah, the next question I had was around, I do think banks and commercial.
Angela, can I just go back on that for just a minute? I had like a flashback to thinking, oh my God, is this going to be on the test? So that's in my head.
Okay.
It is, but what I heard was, it's not good, it's not going to get better in the foreseeable future, and if you have money or a need for office space to rent or buy, now would be the time.